So before we jump into our discussion, we are going to do our recap like always, and we will cut this recap out, host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. And if you find yourself just on that recap video and you're like, man, these guys sure know what they're talking about. I want to hear what their thoughts are on this episode. Well, you're in luck because it'll be linked down in the description below. But without further ado, let us jump into episode 68 of Campaign 3 for the Tempest. Okay, so we pick up with the crew still in the Gray Valley, inside of this cavern that they are basically hiding in and sleeping in for the night. Chetney decides to check out this sword that he just found, and FCG casts Identify on it. And it is revealed to be Graschar the Luminary Blade, and it speaks to FCG as they're holding it. It says they have a great destiny before them, and together they could do great things. The sword also says it was once a great king, but it's been so long, its memory is very foggy, just in general. It's at this point FCG passes the sword to Ashton, who does not trust this thing, and it also tells Ashton that they could do great things together, like wash away the corruption and wash away those who seek to undermine the Taldore Council. Ashton asks, who are your previous owners? And the sword says it's passed through several hands, including a great warrior, a keeper of beasts, and 3 generations of a singular family before it was auctioned off. The rest is foggy. FCG then decides to cast legend lore on this thing. And it's ultimately revealed that those that wield this blade carry behind it a powerful will, and that the light of it is false. The blade does corrode, and the metal is that of the prince's will. So the group gleans from this that that's probably a demon prince that it's talking about. And FCG kind of lets everyone else know what they learned from this legend lore. Excuse me, but passes the sword back to Chetney. And Chetney's like, okay, well, I'm not going to attune for it for now, but I'll hold on to it. The crew then goes to sleep for the night. Imogen has a ruinous dream, however. First one she's had since she donned that circlet. Yeah. So she's back within the red storm, and she can see she's kind of like above, a perspective of above, and she can see through the clouds down below to hundreds of homes and individuals like moving, living their lives down below. And as she stands there, everyone suddenly turns and faces her, their eyes glowing purple. A deep yearning then fills Imogen, and she hears her mother's voice telling her to run away. Matt has Laura roll a wisdom save, and she hits a nat 20. So she kind of flies up and away through the clouds, and then from this super aerial view, she can kind of see some pockets where the storm is not raging. And in these pockets, she can see mountains and valleys and unfamiliar beasts and wildlife. There's like an entire ecosystem here. She then suddenly feels a presence behind her, and it's her mother, like a spiritual projection of her. And she says she wants to protect Imogen more than anything. And Imogen says, well, then why didn't you? And she says, I am. Imogen then asks, are you the one that teleported us all away at the Malleus Key? And Liliana doesn't think so. But Imogen asks, like, why don't you fight back against this? And she says she needs Ludinus just as much as he needs me. And Imogen's like, well, are you setting Predathos free, like, to kill the gods? And Liliana just responds, you deserve to be free. And then she's kind of pulled away and the dream ends. Then while everyone is sleeping, FCG actually casts Commune with the Changebringer. And FCG closes their eyes, and Matt describes this really kind of cool, surreal, perpetual twilight scene with like a big shadowed horizon and a long, sprawling road ahead. And then some distance, again, perspective is weird, but some distance ahead is the Changebringer with her hair like spiraling outward all over this landscape. And FCG gets to ask their questions. So they ask, can the gods help their friends? Yes. Are you worth saving? Of course. Are you scared? And it's at this that the Changebringer leans back, and this mountain in the distance behind her just detonates, and then another and another. And FCG says, okay, like, I'm coming. And then the commune spell ends. So Party long rests. Morning arrives. Chetney actually does attune to this sword in the morning, and FCG thinks that'll be fine because worst case is it's like a curse and I can deal with that. So the party's like, okay,
No problem.
yeah. Imogen then tells everyone about her dream and that she now is like emboldened and more sure than ever that they need to stop this, that she needs to end her connection to Ruidus. She wants to help the gods. She also says she does not trust her mom, who is telling them to stay away. And FCG chimes in and fills everybody in on his commune spell and believes that the Changebringer was pointing them to go to Ruidus. So they basically all realize and agree we have to go to the moon.
Right.
Chetney Chetney decides to speak with the sword that they're calling Chad for now. And he asks the sword about Predathos, Ludinus, and the Matron of Ravens. Chad does not know Predathos, does remember Ludinus, and says that he was around even way back in my day. And then with the Matron, Chad is aware that like the Matron was one of the prime deities, but that's about it. The party leaves this cavern they've been resting in, and they are going to a nearby tree, with the plan being Imogen's going to teleport everyone she can, and then they're going to tell the Ashari and set up like a tree stride for all the rest of the people they rescued. So as they're doing that, they basically come to this new plan because somebody says, hey, what if we just put all of the extra people we can't teleport into the portable hole?
Yeah.
And then
great.
teleport. And they actually decide to do this. So FCG, Laudna, Chetney, and Fern all volunteer to be the ones inside the hole. Imogen teleports, and they safely arrive in Zephra without a hitch. So after some quick reunions, the flowers are given to the herbalists, and a salve is made, and the party then head to Keyleth to get her this ointment. They apply the salve to her, and her wounds actually begin to close for the first time. And with that happening, Keyleth grabs some of her own spell components and heals herself. She says, you have my thanks, and she tells Aurum, you've done a great job. Thank you so much. We have more to speak about, but first I must address my people. So she gets up, goes to, like the balcony, as it were, and gives the inspiring speech. Everyone is very elated to see their leader back on her feet, and the party feels good to have a win. Keyleth honors the fallen Ashari, but also the surviving heroes, Aurum among them. After this speech, the gang heads back inside with Keyleth to her quarters to kind of get her up to speed, and that's where we go to break on the first half.
Great job, man. Good stuff.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so let me just go ahead and tell you, there's a lot of lore. There's a big lore drop in this second half, so I'm going to pull up my notes here to make sure that I don't miss anything. So quite a bit happens. Keyleth, she addresses everyone, like I guess in the town, so to speak. She comes back in and she's basically like, okay, it's time for us to get on the same page for what's next. Keyleth basically talks about the state of Exandria and how there have been all sorts of attacks that have been popping up. Vasselheim in particular has seen many of its temples be attacked, and that the city itself is sort of walling itself off, closing itself off to the world at large. Meanwhile, many the armies that were intending to have been sent south to the excavation site are actually being called back so that the individual kingdoms aren't vulnerable to further attacks. She also mentions that the attack that they witnessed in the Grey Valley is not surprising, and that it seems like many various forces are seeing this as like a prime moment to be able to take their chance, essentially. Imogen talks about the state of Ruidus and her vision and how there's a whole ecosystem there, though Keyleth isn't quite sure of any more information with it. They also talk about how, or Keyleth actually mentions that Ludinus has been sighted in the Dwendalian Empire, and that he's apparently been meeting with King Dwendal, who's been bedridden for a long time, for many years, and that the Cerberus Assembly has sort of been acting acting in the place of the king to help run the empire. However, there's also mentioned that the Cerberus assembly, that there's dissent within the ranks, and Orym even wonders if could there be a possibility to connect with whoever is dissenting against Ludinus or whatever this massive plan is. It's also around this time that Imogen offers to conjure her elemental, the Ray Lauren, so that they can get an idea of maybe what the Ray Lauren knows and just show Keyleth firsthand what these Ray Laurens look like. So she casts the spell, and this time, whereas before it was kind of like this, I won't say amorphous, like it was like kind of like a red spiritual elemental, this now is a more pronounced humanoid figure. It seems like with this beam connected to Ruidus that this Ray Lauren is somewhat more present than the previous time that she summoned one. The party as a whole is fairly surprised, and Imogen actually begins to talk to the Ray Lauren as the Ray Lauren asks, like, hey, I'm at your service. What do you need from me? So like I mentioned, Imogen's surprised that this Ray Lauren is speaking, and so begins to ask questions like, how many of you are there? Like, where are you from? And the Ray Lauren gives somewhat cryptic answers, things like, you know where I'm from. There's as many of us as there's ever been. And even begins asking questions like, do you know who I am? Do you know where you are? And again, doesn't get much clarity there other than finally asking, what is it that you all want? And I think she gets some kind of vision of beautiful fields or something to that effect. And what she infers from that is that the Ray Laurens essentially feel like not necessarily robbed of the experience that all Exandrians have had, but that they in their prison on Ruidus are at least aware of the life that Exandrians get to live. And in fact, I think the Ray Lauren even mentions, like, we know your dreams, like we see your dreams. All that to say, eventually Imogen ends the spell, the Ray Lauren leaves, and immediately Keyleth is like, okay, we need more allies. If we're gonna take on whatever's happening on Ruidus, like, we're going to need to gather more allies. It's around this time also that Ashton begins to ask Keyleth about, hey, what do you know about the Hishari? You're the leader of the Hishari. Like, what do you know about them? Keyleth tells a very similar story to what we already know. She adds on to a detail that we didn't know, which was that Efterin, the leader of the Hishari, apparently got the blessing of Yvonne Trevere, the tree of atrophy, which is a tree that is from a former Gouge Rishari that is located on an island within the Shattered Teeth. And that it's kind of like a bit of a myth that Efterin actually received this blessing. It's also through this conversation that Ashton's like, okay, well, I was created through whatever ritual Efterin did, and Keyleth actually holds his hands and begins to do some kind of spell, essentially examining Ashton, and when she opens her eyes, she immediately is blown away by what she describes as a vast, powerful force within Ashton, and even goes on to say that Ashton is a titan of blood, which the party freaks out over. Really awesome moment. So Ashton is apparently this incredible source of power, and the party basically talks about, okay, if we're going to eventually go to Ruidus, if we're eventually going to fight Predathos, maybe even, we're going to maybe even need some of this primordial power that's found in Ashton. And so they ask more about this tree of atrophy, Yvonne Trevere, and eventually decide, okay, I think we need to go to the Shattered Teeth. Now, remember, the Shattered Teeth is the remains of Dominus, which is where Avalere was in the miniseries Calamity. So chat was freaking out. The players were freaking out about the idea of going to the Shattered Teeth. But before they want to do that, they also want to ask Keyleth about this harness that they have that they took from Malesmere, from Ludinus's quarters. And they don't get too much more insight on it other than Keyleth mentioning, okay, this whole feed the root thing, this reminds me of like a saying in Ashari about how like the core of your being is found at like the base of your neck. And they talk about, okay, there's something happening here with this device that Ludinus has been using to presumably feed his essence, feed his soul. We're not quite sure. But they decide, okay, if we're going to go team up with the Primordials, if we're going to use their power, or I guess what's left of the Primordials, if we're going to use their power in some way, if we're going to fight Ludinus and Prodathos, we might need to turn this device into something that, this harness into something that we can use, which then leads into a conversation of talking about, okay, well, who do we know that can maybe help us with the device? And they say, well, maybe Dancer could help. Dancer turned FCG back on, so maybe he would know a thing or two. But then they're like, well, maybe not Dancer. Maybe they should go see D, like D, the automaton who, from campaign 2, who, if somehow found FCG before selling them off to Dancer. Well, they're not really quite sure which way to go. And so FCG actually casts Scry and sees D standing on the edge of a coast somewhere. And the party realizes this is actually the Menagerie Coast. He also casts Scry on D and sees D passed out in some small, dimly lit cottage. So they're kind of like, okay, well, which one should we go to? Well, so then FCG decides that he's going to cast Divination and ask the Changebringer, hey, which person should we go talk to? Then what ensues is about 10 minutes of just pure hijinks, because Matt gives, I think it was punishment for Sam Riegel trolling him over the blue paranym flower. But Matt basically says something like, go to the one who gave you life. And so FCG is like, oh, well, that's Dancer. Then everyone else is like, well, no, that'd be D, because D found you. And so like, okay, we're obviously not agreeing. So he decides to cast Divination again. And he's like, okay, hey, so like being more specific, like, so which one should I go to again? And Matt again responds with, go to the one that you're more bound to, which they're like, okay, that still kind of feels like that could be either one. The table's losing it at this point. And so FGG is finally like, all right, fine, I'm casting Divination again. And he's like, just tell me, am I going to Dancer or to D? And Matt says, the road you seek will be the one whose name begins with the letter D. And basically tells Sam that, hey, every subsequent reading, you're just going to get a generic answer like this. All this to say, you should check out our YouTube video on this cut. It's absolutely hilarious. But Imogen does have the idea, hey, why don't I give you the staff? You can attune to it. And then if you want to go to the place you saw in your dream, we can figure that out tomorrow after we sleep. So like, okay, great, that's fine. And they're like, okay, let's just go to bed and let's go to the next day. But before they leave, Keyleth, it was almost kind of like a moment of Matt speaking directly to Oram, basically bends down and begins to address Oram. And we know that over several episodes that Oram's kind of, I wouldn't say lost his way, but has definitely gotten discouraged and kind of lost the strong dad energy that he's had for the group. And Keyleth really delivers this beautiful monologue of him relying on his friends and not carrying the burden by himself, and to basically continue to step into this path of bravery that he's been on from the get-go. And at the end of this speech, actually awards him a new title and says, you are Oram, savior blade of the Tempest, and you are never alone. Another amazing moment in this episode. And from there, that is essentially where the episode comes to an end. Episode 68 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role for The Tempest. And again, if you want to see our full thoughts on the episode, you can check out the link below to see our full discussion, and also let us know what you thought of the episode as well.